Welcome. We're going to start with the Georgia ETV webinar. Welcome to the call. We have a couple of folks here in the room who are going to present with you. My name is David Myers. I work at the Fanning Institute here at UGA.
I'm Jason Bedgood. I also work here at the Fanning Institute at UGA.
And I'm Lori Tiller, also here.
So our purpose today is well, we're here for a couple of purposes. One is to introduce the concept of ETV in case there are some of you who are not familiar with the Education and Training Voucher Program. Also, we're going to talk about how students become eligible and then maintain that eligibility, and then some of the nuts and bolts processes. But we're going to get into that a little bit deeper in just a few minutes. So a couple of details about the call itself. We have over 40 folks who are on the call. So just as a courtesy, I'm going to ask that each of you, if you would, just mute your phones or mute your software on the webinar software itself, so that we don't get some feedback or background noise that interferes with folks hearing the content. And then if you have a question at any point during the presentation today, we want to make sure that we're responsive to as many as we can. There's a chat function as part of the webinar software. That's going to be the best way. So if you're at your keyboard and you can just type in a quick question, if we haven't explained something as fully as you'd like, or you have a related question, go ahead and type it in, and we'll make sure that we incorporate all those. There is another way. Next to your name, you should be able to see a hand where you can click and raise your hand, and then we'll make sure to get to your question that one of those two ways. So I hope that makes sense. I hope you can hear us okay. And anything else we missed, guys?
I think that sounds great as far as the logistics for how this will all work. Again, chat or question box, we've got both of those pulled up, and we'll be responsive to those as we can. If we know we're going to answer your question in the upcoming minutes, we may pause it and allow that to be answered as we go. And then again, if we notice your hand being raised, we'll pause at an appropriate time there. But no, moving on to the big things that we're going to talk about today, just want to make sure you guys have an idea of what we're going to walk through and when you can pause us during those moments. Here are our big 4 items. So what exactly is ETV? What does it mean? Why does UGA have anything to do with this? How does it work? And then our message that we give out to our students and that our state representatives, our ILSs, and we'll talk more about ILSs in just a little while. How do they work, and what messages are they sending to students? So you're actually going to see this box, these 4 bubbles, throughout your presentation today with the highlighted bubble that we're talking about. If you notice that highlighted bubble was highlighted and now it's not, it's because we've moved on. That might be a good time to ask a question if we've moved on from an area before you've answered your question about that specific topic. So let's get into our first bubble today.
All right, the ETV program. ETV stands for Education and Training Vouchers. And the big idea here is that the ETV program exists to provide financial supports to students who have experienced foster care as they pursue a post-secondary educational credential, be that a degree or a certificate from an accredited institution. So each of the states across the country has some allocation of ETV funds. Georgia has an allocation of ETV funds. They flow to the State Division of Family and Children Services office, and then they subcontract with us to administer those funds. And we're going to talk a little bit about why UGA is involved in that in just a second. But that's the big picture. Those expenses, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty details, but those expenses can range from tuition to housing to books to monthly expenses and on down the line.
So that's kind of the what. David, would you mind speaking to the who? I know we have us. We're part of this process. There's ILSs. There's our director and the state office. Can you just unfold the who?
Sure. Some of the key players.
Sure.
So we're at UGA, and as part of UGA specifically, we operate in the Fanning Institute, the J.W. Fanning Institute for Leadership Development. We're the institutional partner for the division that helps to do a couple of things. Make sure that the checks are being written on time with proper documentation. We're working with the key players, the relationship players for the young people who have been in foster care are the independent living specialists. So we're a partner with the independent living program at the State Division of Family and Children's Services. The independent living program is headed by their director, Dr. Nia Canty, and they have staff at the state office, and then also they have regional staff. And Jason's already mentioned the term independent living specialist. They're the folks across the state in each of the DFACS regions who maintain a relationship with those young people who have been in foster care, and then they're our primary liaison when it comes time for making sure that payments are being made and students have their schedules kept.
Absolutely, absolutely. We realize that some of our audience will already recognize that, but some may not, and we're speaking to a wide range of folks helping take care of our students. So if we're repeating something you've heard before, we appreciate you understanding. Now, David, you did mention that we're here at the University of Georgia. That is our office. Will you give a kind of a brief description of why that happened the way it does?
Sure. So we've been involved with partners with the independent living program for a long time now. We deliver a program called College Bound, which is an opportunity for young people who are currently in foster care in high school to come and spend some time on campus. We partner with the Ensoro Foundation to do that. That happens in June for the last 7 years. We also have developed a statewide network known as the Embark Network, and Embark exists to create additional or increased college access for students who have experienced foster care and or homelessness. And so the concept behind having the ETV program live at UGA or be a contractor or a partner was to leverage those two resources so that students have access to not only information about relationships and people who can help them on campuses, but also in one place have the connection to the financial supports where they can pay for some of those expenses at school at their post-secondary institution. So that's very briefly how ETV came to UGA, and that's how we became a contracting partner with the State Division.
Absolutely. So David works directly with our clients and directly with our students as well. I spend a little bit more time in the office working on making sure checks leave our office and get to the schools and partners that we need those checks to get to day in and day out. Lori spends, our program also spends a lot of time in evaluation and research, and Lori is that component, such a big, vital part of why we do what we do and how we do it well. Is Lori. Lori, do you want to speak to any of that evaluation survey side?
Sure, yeah, we have 1 to 2 surveys a year that students are required or urged to respond to. Pretty short survey. They get it $25. It goes into the analysis we do, and then we keep track through all of Jason's services while seeing where the checks go and to who, and keep track of where the students are in their educational pursuits.
And I think that's one of the things that I failed to mention right off the bat was that as a university partner, we have the capacity to help the state understand how these dollars are being used, what's the progress that the students are making both individually and as a whole. And I think that this marks the end of our second full contract year, so we're just now at a spot where we're able to look at a couple of years worth of data and begin to have some understanding of how that progress is going, how students are progressing, and begin to understand what are some graduation rates and progression rates. And so that's a big part of what we're trying to understand.
And makes it exciting to get to do this every day, to think about that long-term impact, and to be able to plot that out and see those statistics. When we first came on, this process first started, and we began this, we had to ask the question, can we even write checks to other institutions, and how would that work? And we realized that we could do that the University of Georgia had the capacity in its accounting department to write those checks, and we had the capacity to keep track and make phone calls and make that work happen. And we have since begun to do that and feel like we've been doing it pretty well for a couple years now. So we, as you can imagine, we get those requests, we verify those requests, and we then request checks on our end in our accounting department, and we mail those out, and we make sure that those checks get to where they're going to get to, all the while trying our best to communicate well with our ILSs, our state specialists there, and for them to be able to communicate with our students. But But the ins and outs of actually how you get into ETV and how a student would actually come to that place, there are some criteria. The state has allocated an amount of funds to use to give out to pay for college needs, for post-secondary needs, and those funds have to be managed in a certain way, and they are only provided to students who meet a certain criteria. Students must have been in care for at least 6 months after the age of 14 or have been adopted after spending 6 months in care after the age of 14. There are some additional criteria that go along with that. Every case is a little bit different. We see a student that may have re-entered care with their original family may be in a different situation as well, and we answer those questions on a case-by-case basis as those details get a little trickier and more defined. But in a general sense, if the student has been in foster care for at least 6 months after the age of 14, we start talking and having a conversation about paying and providing aid for post-secondary situations. There's some other criteria there. There is an age limit. No one over the age of 25, so the max is 25, and then once you hit 26, you would have aged out. You must be attending an accredited college or technical school or institution. It is only for 1 degree or certificate, meaning that if a student already has a degree or some sort of certificate and now is trying to go back for another one, where that's an undergrad or a graduate, we would not be able to provide support there. And then lastly, we are a last dollar funding. Pell Grant comes before we do. Hope Grant comes before we do. Any scholarships that exist out there come before we do. We have to make sure that students have gotten all their other scholarships and financial aid posted to their account before we're able to support that student. We see a question here. Will we receive a printout or PDF of these slides? Yes, great question. Thank you for asking. We actually have all your emails when you registered. You sent in your email, and we were able to collect that information. We'll use those emails and then send this back out either late this afternoon or early in the morning, and you guys will receive all this information for your files as well, and for you to be able to communicate with your students and folks you're working with. So, awesome. So those are our criteria for receiving ETV. Those are some of the big pieces and how that process works. Actually getting and keeping ETV. There's 2 big tricks that I always tell our students when we're talking about how do I actually get into the ETV program. If you do qualify, if you meet those criteria that we were just talking about, you have to have 2 things, either a high school diploma or a GED, and then you have to have been accepted into a post-secondary institution. I don't necessarily need to know your transcript from high school or your GED program. If you have the diploma or GED diploma, then we don't need the transcript from high school. And we just need the acceptance into a college or tech school post-secondary institution. You have to complete an application. We have to have your information on file. You do that through working with your independent living specialist. Throughout your time in that program, whatever post-secondary education program you have to keep a 2.0. That's a cumulative average. And then you must continue every semester, fill out some more information. We like to tell our students that part of the aid and part of the work that comes with the aid is filling out your name and address over and over and over and over. We completely understand that can be monotonous at times and just be an added piece to this, but we've got to make sure that we're sending checks to the right addresses, we've got grades on file, and that we're receiving all the information that we need in order to keep supporting students as well as we can. There's another caveat that we like to make sure students are aware of. There is a piece in the state policy that requires students to be in school at the age of 21 in order to continue receiving funds after 21. So if for some reason a student graduates high school, delays going to school for some reason, we all have our different reasons why that might be the case. If they wait until they're after 21, we will not be able to support that student. So we have to be really careful about making sure if our students are going to go to college, they're in there before they hit the age of 21, or else we will not be able to support our students going to college after that age. We pay for a lot of different things. All the things you can see here, most of the things you can imagine that you would need as part of going to school. Transportation is even included on there. We've helped with some bus tickets for students to get across the state as those things have come up. And also a stipend down here. You notice that term stipend there. That stipend is typically $75 or $150 depending on each individual student situation, whether they're on campus, off campus, in an assisted living program or not. Those come onto a reloadable debit card, and students use them just as they would a debit card with their own PIN and information. Once the student has that card, they own it. It is their card, and we just reload funds as the students are eligible for.
Jason, can you talk for a second? I know there are some, well, without getting into every single little detail, but like for housing, for instance, there may be limits to what ETV can provide based on whether the students are living on campus or off campus.
That is a great question. Let me say the on-campus versus off-campus. We really want our students to live on campus if at all possible. The policy and the procedures that kind of govern what we do and how we do it allow us to pay a lot more funds to on-campus housing versus off-campus, knowing that the studies show that on-campus students are more successful than off-campus students. Now, not every college or institution would have an on-campus living option. For that reason, we do offer a reimbursement. You can see how we pay out funds here. We do offer reimbursements to students who are living off campus if their situation allows. Typically, most of our payments do go to this first tier of institutions. We're paying tuition, room and board, your books and supplies, and that check is being directly written to that school, bookstore, or housing agency. If a student lives off campus and they are eligible to receive some sort of rent reimbursement, then we will get that student registered in our system and send a check to the ILS to hand off to the student to reimburse them for the rent. I will say that rent reimbursement is only half of their rental rate, not to exceed $300. So if a student is paying an exorbitant amount for rent, we will only be able to help up to $300 a month in that case, or half the rental rate if it's less than that. We also provide, you see this other column on the far right, some of these other less typical situations that students get into, but we have been able to pay for training and supply uniforms. We've had students in the medical field and need certain uniforms to go through their program, and we've been able to work with companies to make that happen. Even a few driver's license, we've even been able to support students as they were getting their driver's license. Again, they would have to be in the ETV program in a post-secondary situation going to school, but if that's the case, those are a few places that we pay for. So the only thing that I have ever seen us not be able to pay for that a student has needed is a car repair. Again, we've paid bus tickets, we've paid a couple of different transportation situations. We once had a student ask if there was any way we could help fix their car. We sent it up the ladder, and after the review of the policy through the state, it was determined we could not, based on policy, support the repair of a car. But that so far has been the only thing to help a student in their schoolwork that we have not been able to support. Thinking about the dollar amount, how much actual funds does a student get per year? We can only pay up to these dollar amounts listed at per age. You can see the $12,500 from the age you're 18 to 20 years old. Once you hit 21, that amount decreases, and then you hit 23, and that amount decreases again. Down to 5,000, the policy is structured so that students are expected to graduate around the age of 22. That is the expectation. A few students will go in to a program a little longer than those standard 4 years, and there's an opportunity to still support some in there, but the expectation is students go to school and graduate.
So you can see on the bottom of this slide too, where it says based on state and federal fund availability, and I think it's really important to note that there is these are limited funds. These are not total entitlement funds. And so, therefore, our job is to figure out how to make sure to be good stewards of the funds and also to make sure that we stretch them as far as we can. So that's why there's a cap per year per student based on their age. And if at some point, if it ever were the case that this funding stream were to be eliminated, then, of course, the state would be making decisions about how to provide for that, for these expenses in other ways.
Absolutely. I do want to reiterate this per year is actually a fiscal year. So our fiscal calendar is October 1 until September 30th of the following year. And so on October 1, here in just a couple weeks, that funding pool for each student will reset, and that student will start at zero, and they will have $12,500 to spend as they need to. If we jump back just a couple slides, we can pay for all of these different areas. There are some limits on some rent and stipends, obviously, but outside of that, we have written checks for upwards of $5,000–6,000 to pay for room and board for a semester. If a student, for whatever reason, through Pell and Hope, are receiving all the support they need to pay for tuition and books, but can't pay for their housing, if they're living on campus, we can write some pretty large checks to help out and make sure that student is not feeling that excess burden of not having somewhere to live, being able to pay for it through these funds. So we want to make sure our students are aware of the timelines, make sure all of our representatives are aware of the timelines that exist for our students. You can begin filling out the FAFSA starting October 1st now. That date used to be January 1, and they've recently pushed it back to October 1st now. So that's if you're a typical high school student, your senior year, October 1st, we ask our students to go ahead and fill out that FAFSA and start working through that process. Then in November, start applying to college if there's not already an early enrollment in that process.
And I suspect many of you do know, but in case you don't, FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And most, if not all, of the offices of financial aid on college campuses are going to require that a FAFSA be completed by students in order to be considered for institutional aid.
Absolutely. And we also recognize that if your student is anything like I was, or David or Lori was, or any other student, there's a good chance that these pieces of paper don't get filled out until February, March, or April, even May, into the summer. That's not to say that they can't be filled out at that time, but the ideal time to fill out these documents are as early as possible to get information into this system as they possibly can. In going into May, we notice there's things should change. We should be doing a few different things. We start working with the actual schools that the students are going to be attending. They need to start receiving that their documents, whether it's high school diploma, GED, some paperwork that they're going to be starting sending to their ILS. As they get that information to their ILS, the ILS is going to build their case file, and as they have that case file, they're going to start sending that information to us as we need. And then come the fall, if we have that information, been getting that throughout the summer, we should be able to pay, starting in August, as we typically do, start paying for those fees as they begin to hit, and providing the students with stipend cards or potential rent reimbursements as those things happen. At the end of that semester, we're going to need grades. We're going to request some updated information as information changes. I think I am 10 years out of college now, but in my college days and now I think I've moved 12 times. It's just the world we live in that we move a lot to find the best rent situation or housing situation. It happens. And so we need updated information on all our students that are moving and going, and we need those grades as well. So that's our timeline that we look at. I see a question here. What if the youth was in foster care in Georgia but now lives in another state? Are the funds to be spent only in Georgia? That is a wonderful question. Thank you so much for asking. The funds can actually cross state lines, but only a limited amount. So let me go back to this guy right here. So that $12,500 a year that the student is that is allocated for the student, 5,000 of those dollars can cross state lines, and we do have students that are in other places attending school outside of Georgia. Out of that 10,000, 5,000 of that can also cross state lines. Out of the final 5,000, that all has to stay in state. So up until that student reaches that $10,000 threshold there, they are able to use 5,000 outside of state to go to school. If a student was originally in care in another state and moves to the state of Georgia, they would need to use the ETV programs in their original state. And we do get that call frequently. Student was in care in a different state or whatnot, and then all of a sudden they're coming to Georgia to go to school. They would have to use their ETV from their state.
So the bottom line, $5,000 is eligible to cross state lines to go to another institution if a student's going to school out of state.
Yeah. If a foster child signs themselves back into foster care at the age that they qualify for ETV funds. So we actually the signing in and out of care is not quite as big of a deal as that original criteria of 6 months in care after the age of 14. If they sign themselves out, that doesn't impact the work that we're doing here and their ability to necessarily be eligible. And if they were to sign themselves back in at some point, that doesn't necessarily affect their ability to be eligible. Again, I will say that every case is a little bit different, and depending on where that student has been and how they've been with their family or disconnected from their families, things could change case by case. But the general rule is 6 months in care after the age of 14, whether they are currently in care at 18 or not. So, thinking about our messages to students, that's all kind of the how to it works. So if there's any other how does it work that you're thinking you didn't catch something of how it worked, keep filtering your questions there. We'll keep trying to answer those questions as those come up at an appropriate time. But we want to really communicate the messages that we're speaking to our students. We have the opportunity to go to each region and speak with the our rising college students, our rising tech school students throughout the year. And so we'll actually travel to each part, get all our high school students that we can in one room, and communicate a lot of these messages to our students that you're going to see here. In order for any student to get through the post-secondary process and get that degree or certificate, it's really important to have that plan and to start planning early. If they can start filling out the FAFSA in October, start applying to schools in October and November, that goes a long, long way. If they have a plan and know what they want to do, that goes even further. And I know most of us didn't have that plan when we went through it, but how much better would it have been if we had for the purposes of getting some things done. So let's walk through a few of these pieces here of things we want to communicate to our students. First, we want to make sure our students know all their options, whether they're going straight to work or going to the military or going to school. We want to make sure that they know that those different options are on the table. We do not necessarily provide any support to our students that are going to the military, not because that's not a great potential path for students, but because the military will provide you an income if you're going that route. We like to encourage our students that if at all possible that they would get some sort of post-secondary education. Every student situation is different, but we encourage our students to understand the different options available to them and the statistics that relate to those options. Basic chart here shows us that earning a bachelor's degree over just a high school diploma, I believe this was in 2013, would have lifetime netted them an extra $1 million to work with. We certainly don't try to communicate to our students that the highest salaries are the best or that the most money will make you happy, but that extra $1 million in your lifetime to spend and use does provide some flexibility that can be nice and freeing for many of our students that have big dreams in front of them. We also want to make sure our students understand that there are some unemployment rates that go along with the different degrees and diploma and levels of education that students are going to get. Here again in 2013, we see a difference of only 3.5% in the unemployment rate between bachelor's degrees and high school diplomas. That would have been about 5.25 million people in America back then. We want to make sure also our students understand, and this can be a complicated process, what's the difference between a trade school and a college or a university, and how do those things differ? Communicating those messages well so that students know what they're getting into and spending the money on is very, very important. We see trade schools provide a specific training or skill. I like to ask my students, I tell them I'm a teacher. I am a teacher trained educator, and then moved into this field and make a teacher salary still. And I always like to ask our students who makes more, my teacher or my plumber. And I always like to tell them that a good plumber probably makes a little more than I do, even having been to a trade school and done that work. The difference between the teacher and the plumber is also that if the plumber wants to change jobs, they're going to have to go back to school because they're trained as a plumber. As an educator, I have an education degree, but that allows me the opportunity to do a handful of different things and move in a handful of different directions. So while salaries may not directly line up into these different categories, oftentimes the ability to move and work in different jobs and change over the course of your life do. You guys stop me in the room here if we need to add or take away anything. Want to make sure students are understanding why they're choosing to go where they go. We are here at the University of Georgia, and I came here because I knew about their football team, and I thought they had a really good football team and thought that would be fun. Probably not the best reason to come to a university, but luckily it worked out. But our students, do they have good reasons why they're going where they go? And then do they understand the cost of what's going to hit them? That tends to be just such a huge factor for so many of our students. We're talking about food, books, tuition, just the whole living expense of making life happen and going to school, very likely full time at a different school. And can we determine what it's actually going to cost? And the answer is yes, we can definitely determine that well before we go. We like to point students to the National Center of Educational Statistics. We've got a website listed in this presentation towards the end under some resources you can reference later. And if you use this site, you can point your students to it. If they're questioning, hey, how much is it going to cost me to go to this school or that? This we have found to be a very accurate website. If you'll just type in your school's information. Here we use Dalton State College up in North Georgia as our example. If you click on the little tuition and fees button there, you'll see the tuition and fees over here on your far right for the most recent year. You've got your actual tuition, which is a pretty good rate there at $3,500 a year. Then you've got your room and board, the living there at Dalton State, your extra expenses that are going to come with living that don't get covered under room and board, and finally your total for living, an in-state tuition of about $15,000 a year. Not a bad rate for an in-state, pretty good in-state school. We also threw up here West Georgia just to give you a little comparison. Tuition just a little more expensive, living expenses a little more as well, and that's going to give you about $22,000 a year. For working or going to school at the University of West Georgia. Obviously, there are a handful of different things that can cover those costs. We have scholarships and grants, which are great resources. I'm not aware of a scholarship or grant that would ever have to be paid back. I don't know that they exist. I always like to tell students scholarships are what you did in the past, grants are for what you're going to do in the future. You receive a grant to do good work, you receive a scholarship based on a resume and things you put together. And the jobs are also available to our students. That is not out of the possibility for students to cover their work with jobs. And while loans are not the best option, we realize that some students ultimately will have to take out loans. I know I had to take out loans to make life happen, and that is something that does occur. But we do like to avoid those if at all possible. David mentioned just a minute ago the FAFSA, our David, what did you call it? The free
application for federal student aid.
Our FAFSA free application for federal student aid there. We've got a FAFSA forecaster here for our students if they're wondering what actually they're going to be able to receive through the FAFSA. They can actually go on the website and forecast what they're going to be able to receive and start making those plans early and often. They'll choose their basic information, make sure that they list that they were in care after turning the age of 13. Once they fill out their information, they're going to have to submit here at the bottom, and they're going to get this dollar amount showing them their Pell Grant and any other aid they may be eligible for based on their criteria. But they're also going to get this little button down at the bottom talking about student loans. Now, if you're going to get a student loan rate, this is the best one you're going to receive. There's not a better student loan rate out there that we've seen than the state and federal student loans, but they're still a high rate. So students want to be aware that while this money could come to them in the form of a check or be applied to their accounts at school, they need to be very careful about those interest rates that do apply. We encourage our students to understand this chart really well. We like to put this in their hands every time we go and see them, and make sure that they understand that if they're taking out a loan for potentially $25,000, in the end, paying that back over a 10-year span, it's actually going to cost them around $8,000 to take out that loan. So we'd encourage you to communicate that to your students as well, that if they can at all avoid loans or pay them back as soon as they could, please do that, and make sure students know, even if they don't finish their degree and don't get their certificate that they were planning to get, they're still going to have to pay back these loans. It's still going to be a pretty big deal. And a potentially amount decline depending on how that works out. Okay. Those are all our messages that we kind of communicate to our students as we're talking and working with those students, or at least those are the big ones. I'm going to pause right here. I see a question has come up. If a child comes into care 3 to 4 months before turning 18, will they later be eligible for funding once they've successfully completed their semester year of college? So it comes into care. If they were in care, I'll go back to if they were in care 6 months after the age of 14. David, you may be more privy to this than I am. I don't know, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure the care situation after 18. I'm not sure exactly how that works. We trust our ILSs for those eligibility questions. But if you could say that your student was in care for 6 months after the age of 14, we definitely need to have a conversation about that specific student. Yeah. So, anything to add to that?
I think the question really becomes if can you count some of those months after a student turns 18 towards their eligibility? And I'm going to be honest with you, my gut tells me probably not, since that after 18 is a voluntary option. But that's something that we can certainly clarify with our folks at the state office.
Yeah. So, again, you'll have our email after today. It's actually it should be. It's not listed on this this page. We'll include it whenever you see that email from us. But on all our contact information, please email us with those or call us with those specific questions and details about each individual student. Every student's case is a little bit different, and we want to help those as much as we can. So.
Sure, and up next, just so you guys, what you're seeing right now, as David mentioned at the very beginning, one of the programs that we had been working on prior to ETV is Embark, and that's supporting young people who have been in foster care or homeless going and getting their post-secondary education degree. So this is just a screenshot of our Embark Georgia website, which is embarkgeorgia, Georgia all spelled out, .org. And if you go here, there's some tabs at the top end if you want to go to the next one. But one of the big things that we have is this page, which are our designated points of contact. And so what this is there is a person that has been assigned on all of the public 2- and 4-year campuses. So that's any of the university system or any of the technical college system schools that is ready and able to help you navigate the system of that institution. So if you have a student that is interested in going to Kennesaw State, you can look up here, you can mouse over one of these bubbles, and you're going to get our designated contact there, who is Marcy Stidham. Same thing for any of the 2- or the 4-year schools. Some of the schools have programming options for the students once they get on that campus, but as you begin to speak with this person, you'll be able to see what's available to the student. So this is a great resource. It has the person's school, name, email, address, and phone number. So you'll be able to call them, you can email them, and generally they respond pretty quickly. There's also on the website a student tab that's got some listings for other resources and student scholarships as well.
I would add just a couple of things. One is that if you were to visit the website now, you see that main red menu header bar. There's an additional menu item called ETV, which has some of the very basic information that we're covering today. We're recording the webinar today, so once we get that final recording, we'll link it on that website, so you can go back to find this information on the ETV tab of the website. And then I see a question here too from Kay Dover. If these students are homeless or out of care, is there something available for them when school is out? And if they are student workers on campus during the summer, is there anything for them in the way of support? And ultimately, what the Embark Network does is provide some connectivity between the representatives on the campuses with the DFACS folks, independent living program folks, some of the homeless liaisons who work in the K-12 system. But as Lori mentioned, individual programming is popping up at individual campuses. So that really, there's nothing systematic that provides housing for students in between sessions, although it is something that we'd like to see down the road. A lot of that, if you get in touch with that point of contact, if there's a young person who you know or needs some support like that, the point of contact is going to be the best bet to help them find some local resource or a summer resource for housing.
And there's also options for food and other things. So of these campuses, about 23 of them right now have some form of a food pantry on their campus as well. So in addition to the housing security, we're trying to work for the food security as well.
So carrying on with Embark, we hosted our first Embark conference last May. You see this is our save the date for the upcoming conference. It's going to be in May 2018. And so we're just now this is the first time we've shared the save the date flyer, but we hope that some of you either may consider attending or know some of the other professionals who work in this field who might want to get together and share information, make connections to better serve students who are trying to pursue that post-secondary degree.
Lastly, here are a few of the resources we mentioned. Again, that Embark Georgia website as well as the FAFSA website, and then our College Navigator down there at the bottom. We sure do hope if you have any questions, you'll email those to us, call us, as you have our phone number on the email, and use this and share with your students and other folks that may be involved in this process. We hope to communicate as well as we possibly can. We know that's a major factor in doing this and doing this well. But we appreciate your time today. We're going to hang around for another 10 or 15 minutes if we need and answer questions. So as you have questions, and if you, for whatever reason, aren't able to use the question type box, if you'll just raise your hand, we can actually give you the mic and let you speak. And we can do that now one at a time. But as we wait, if others need to go, we definitely understand that as well. You'll be seeing this information shortly through your email. David, just to kill some time as we're sitting here waiting on some questions, how's you got a son that just went to college? How's that going?
The transition to college, as some of you may know, is can be a challenge. He's a freshman at Georgia College in Milledgeville, and we're pretty excited about what's happening with him. He's transitioned well. He's fortunate he doesn't need to access ETV funds, but it's a big time in a young person's life, and our goal is to try and help make sure that at least the financial side is the smoothest that it can possibly be.
Yeah. We see the question here. I went to the Embark site. How do you find the college info?
So if you're looking for the designated contacts, that should be under the statewide network tab. And then the students tab is the one that has the scholarships underneath it. Under statewide network, it should have designated contacts.
And I will say under that, I send that to a lot of our students often. As you have that students tab there, click on and find those different scholarships and resources to send your students. Designated points of contacts are great. Those scholarships and information are wonderful as well.
And I see that Anna Riles, that was a question from you. I hope that will you let us know if you're able to find it? Make sure everything's working right with the site.
I saw you typing the name of the college.
Oh, and I'm wondering if you're talking about the Embark site or the College Navigator site.
Ooh, okay. So the College Navigator site, if that's what we're talking about, is right here. We like our site here. If you go to the College Navigator, if you went NCES College Navigator, you could Google that. The NCES is actually a larger site, and this is somewhere within that site. Then you'll see the name search there. So type your school name there, press enter. Once you press enter, you'll get your school, or at least a list of schools that may be the school you're searching for. Click on the different information there, and then you should be able to find all your information. And I love this site. It provides even more than just your tuition and fees. It'll also give you your retention rates, the different programs and majors they offer. So we really do love to push this site out to our students. Hopefully that's what you were looking for. And again, that's the National Center for Education Statistics, College Navigator. Use that word, College Navigator. Okay, I see you here. You got. I'm fairly sure that one student I'm working with is not really ready with the skills they need to begin college. Is there a provision for getting them up to speed? So there actually are some different schools and post-secondary schools that would have some of those remedial courses and training programs to provide students with that background that they need. Again, our two big keys are a high school diploma or GED and then an acceptance into some sort of post-secondary institution. Those are the keys. So if that student has that high school diploma or GED and can get into some sort of post-secondary education institution to fit their needs, then we can really start working together. If they don't have either of those two things or missing either one of those pieces, we are not able to provide support through the ETV program.
And I think just to piggyback on that thought, there's over 30 university system schools in Georgia. There's over 20 technical college system schools, ranging in competitiveness, ranging in cost. There's all kinds of factors. And so this is not a perfect answer to your question, but schools who are more open access institutions likely have better not just remedial coursework, but study skills kind of support on that campus. But even having said that, schools like UGA and Georgia Tech also have supports like that for students once they get on campus, and sort of in recognition that most students who land on a college campus are not completely ready. And I understand that the situation you're describing is likely a little bit more significant than your typical student. So I would encourage you, if you want to talk more specifically, send us an email offline, and we can try to have a conversation and point you to some resources if we can.
Great question. We have worked with some. Do you do any? We got a question here from Michelangelo James. Do you do any in-person presentation at individual schools in Georgia, or would you be able to speak to Board of Education regarding how we may be able to assist your children? David, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So we have done individual presentations to schools. We've also worked with our outreach coordinator here in the Office of Student Financial Aid. Her name is Mandy Branch, and so Mandy has gone and done some individual presentations, not specifically about ETV, but more broadly about accessing financial aid and leveraging the resources that are available. But I think that the answer is sure. If there's an interest in having a customized presentation, we could certainly do that. We're going to be at the State Department of Education Homeless Education Conference next week. So that is something that we do periodically. All right, so ultimately, our goal, and I'm sure we share this goal with all of you who are spending the time with us on the call, is to create is the best opportunity for students who've experienced foster care to pursue that post-secondary degree. We know that going to college is not the only way to be successful and be self-sufficient, but certainly it's a way that it provides a clear path to help make that happen. So we appreciate what you guys do day in and day out to support young people who experience foster care. We appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us, and you see our information here at the end, or some of those websites. And
you'll see our information on the communication.
Yeah, and when we send out the email with the slide deck from today, we'll make sure that our contact information is there. And then, so we're looking forward to working with you. If you have any specific questions after this is over, I would say just let us know. Be in touch.
I'm going to grab one more question here. Under the Anna, you said under tuition and fee, is that the total per year or semester? That's per year. So that is the year. So you can divide that in half for the fall and spring. And again, that's an average. Every student is a little bit different. Every situation is a little bit different. 14 hours is different than 17 hours is different from 9. And most schools are going to charge by the hours and those different rates and how those work. And then your certificate programs differ greatly from those as well. Oftentimes you pay those. And at some institutions, you can pay those all at once at one time. So it's a little different for every school, but typically under that tuition and fee button you're looking at is per year. Is kind of the goal there. Be aware too, Anna, of the in-state versus out-of-state. Don't let that throw you off too much, those two categories in that website. Oh, awesome. That's great to hear. Well, great. If you need anything, hopefully the website matches what you got there. It says you work at a Texas College Nursing, but hopefully the website matches, and if not, maybe you can reach out to the National Center for Statistics and make that correction. So
super. All right, well, thanks everybody. One more time, I hope you have a good rest of the afternoon, and we look forward to working with you and the students that you support.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Bye-bye.